Hello, history fans. Welcome back to our document discussions. This time we have 3 documents to discuss: Jacob Riis, How the Other Half Lives, William Graham Sumner on Social Darwinism, and Andrew Carnegie's Gospel of Wealth. So if you have those, or if you want to pull them up in another tab on your computer, please do so now. We will walk through them together. So Jacob Riis, as you can see in the little intro about him on his document, he is a Danish immigrant. So he's an immigrant too. He's living in the tenements. He kind of understands very clearly, because he's lived it, all of the challenges that come along with being an immigrant. He is what we might think of as an early photojournalist. He's a journalist. He has this written article that we are reading, but he also has a photography series. And we saw a couple of his photos from his series, How the Other Half Lives, in our image analysis, this module. So if you are interested in those, I'll give him a Google. Those were just 2 examples of an entire series of photographs that he took, documenting all of the oppression, all of the struggles, and all of the challenges, and all of the really miserable conditions facing people living in the tenements. So together, the journalism and the photography makes a pretty convincing argument. So he has this project, How the Other Half Lives. In the first couple of paragraphs, he talks about why he calls it that. Is it really half? No, it's 3/4 in the first couple of lines. In the second paragraph, he says, in New York today, 3/4 of the people, 75% of the population, is living this abject misery. And there are ever increasing multitudes. Every year, more and more people are coming from the country to the city. Every year, more and more people are coming from overseas, immigrating to the United States. This problem is only going to get worse. And he says in the first paragraph or 2 that he calls it how the other half, because there's the half on top and the half on bottom, the haves and the have-nots. The house who has everything that they need, and the house of wants. He is afraid that, and it seems pretty clear, that the wealthy 1%ers, 1%ers especially, but even the middle class, don't know how hard life is for the lower 75% living in the tenement, nor do they care. And they should care, because the problems that are coming out of the tenements are just going to make more problems for society writ large. So let's talk about some of the problems that he talks about in the tenements. On the last paragraph on the first page and onto the second page, he starts getting really specific and talking about specific problems that are coming out of the tenements. On the bottom of the first page, one of the social problems that he talks about, he calls the tenements the nurseries of pauperism and crime. What does that mean? Pauperism, if you're a pauper, that means you're not wealthy. You're a beggar, a panhandler. Crime, when we've talked before that when people are so desperate that they have to make a choice between starving or stealing, they're gonna pick stealing. That's just kind of logical. Families, parents don't want to watch their kids starve. Parents need shoes for their kids. Parents need to pay rent. There are a lot of bills that just have to eventually be paid, and when people can't earn enough to pay them, often in the absence of any sort of social welfare system, they turn to crime. So he says, well, okay, there's a lot of poverty, which means that there's a lot of crime, which in turn fills our jails and police courts. There are in our asylums and our workhouses. So the system is overrun, and that's just causing taxpayers trouble, isn't it? That's just causing taxpayers a lot of dollars. He also talks about how on the second page, he starts poking at political machines on the top of the he talks about what are you gonna do about it in the second paragraph on the second page. It was asked once of our city if once at the I can't talk. I talk for a living. This is a problem. It was asked once of our city in taunting defiance by a band of political cutthroats. Well, he's talking about political machines there. He says that political machines solve some problems, but only cause a lot of other problems. Further down in that paragraph, he talks about drunkenness. 40% of the distress among the poor is due to drunkenness. It's recommended the prevention of drunkenness by providing for every man a clean and comfortable home. So drunkenness, there's a lot. Let's talk about it because it's a problem for specific people, but it also has this ripple effect outward. When, in the 21st century, I hope that we realize now that often alcoholism is an addiction. Alcoholism is a disease. When people in this era, it's mostly men because they're the only ones legally allowed inside bars. Women aren't legally allowed to go into bars. When in this era, when men are drinking, why do people drink? Why are they drinking so much? These people are working 6 days a week, 12-hour days. Life's hard. Drinking makes you feel good, if only for a little while. Drinking takes your mind off your troubles, if only for a little while. So men start drinking, they get addicted, and sometimes, unfortunately, men are unhappy drunks. They're angry drunks, and they come home and beat their wives and children. Even if they're not doing that, they come home drunk. They're not being very good, loving, caring, engaged husbands or fathers. If they're spending all of their time at the bar, they're not spending it with their family. If they're spending all of their mornings hungover, that means that they're not at church then on Sunday. If they're hungover every day at work, that's going to make their work more difficult. These guys are working in factories, remember? There's a lot of moving parts. Sometimes digits get caught in those parts and people lose a hand. They're unable to work for a while, which means that their family doesn't have a paycheck. If guys are hungover or get too hurt, maybe they're let go. This is an era before unemployment insurance. Bills need to be paid, and if the man is not able to work, then those bills aren't going to be paid. So alcoholism causes a lot of problems. It is the root of a lot of troubles coming out of the tenements, not only for the individual themselves who is drinking, that's going to take a toll on your liver eventually, but it also has this ripple effect outward. It means that these men are not being good husbands, not being good fathers, not being good workers. They're spending all of their time at the bar and not with their family. They're spending all of their money buying alcohol and not paying rent or groceries or buying shoes for their kids. Alcoholism causes a lot of other problems too. So one of the other problems that Jacob Riis goes on to talk about, kind of 2/3 of the way down that paragraph, he says, the only answer to the tenement's request to have the place put in order by repairs and necessary improvements was that they must pay their rent or leave. He starts talking about the actual conditions, specific physical, logistical conditions of the tenement houses, of the apartments that they're in. Today we have renter's insurance. That's not a thing back then. If you're a renter and your pipes bust or somebody throws a ball through your window, your landlord is supposed to be the one to fix that. There's supposed to be repairs that they do periodically to maintain the property. The property owners are not maintaining the property. They're not fixing things when things go wrong. If you don't like having a hole in your wall, tough, move out. What are you going to do? So towards the bottom of that second page, Jacob Riis finally starts getting his most strident and starts pointing fingers. And he says, the greed of capital that wrought this evil must itself undo it. Philanthropy and 5% is the penance exacted. He's talking about how the wealthy people, the 1%ers, the uber extra super wealthy, the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and the JP Morgans of the world, they're the ones who have all of the money. They're the ones who have all of the political pull and the social influence. They're the only possible ones who can solve this problem. Nobody else has any chance of doing so. The wealthy need to use their money well. And he says that that's a good economics too. Onto the bottom of the second and onto the top of the third page, he says that's good economics. If you take care of your workers, they're going to be better able to work for you. If they're healthy, they're going to be better workers. If they're happy, they're going to be better workers. That's just taking care of your work. Taking care of your workers is just taking care of your bottom line. But then he also points out that this is important from a Christian standpoint too. It's the right thing to do. We are all brothers in Christ, Jacob Rees says. So Jacob Rees, what I hope you get out of How the Other Half Lives article and the photos that we looked at in our image analysis is that Jacob Rees is all about raising awareness of all of these problems that are facing immigrants living in the tenements. It's overcrowded. There's no sanitation. There's poverty and crime, and which leads to overcrowding of jails. There's drunkenness. There's political corruption. The landlords aren't taking care of the physical space, the physical building. All of these problems that face immigrants in the tenements. Our other two documents kind of go together. William Graham Sumner on social Darwinism and Andrew Carnegie's Gospel of Wealth. We talked about how Jacob Rees was kind of pointing fingers at the wealthy 1%ers. Right off the bat, when we started talking about the Gilded Age, we said that the number one root problem is wealth inequality, that for the first time, there was a huge gap, huge gap between the wealthy and the poor, that the wealthiest 1% in America own 90% of the wealth. That's a massive jump. So we also mentioned in our lecture, I think, that because of that, the wealthy 1%ers are in a situation where they have to justify keeping all of that money and why they should get to hoard all of that money. So our first one that we're going to talk about is William Graham Sumner on social Darwinism. William Graham Sumner, says our little intro, it says that he is a sociologist at Yale University. So right off the bat, he's at Yale. Okay. So if you're going to Yale or you're teaching at Yale or you're studying Yale, you're probably pretty wealthy. It's an Ivy League university. So we can assume that he is a wealthy guy. He's got some money laying in an account somewhere. And he's a sociologist that he studies society. Okay, so he's a social commentator. This idea of social Darwinism should make you think of ideas of science. Charles Darwin and his theory of evolution and his idea of survival of the fittest. That's kind of where your brain should be. So in the first paragraph, he starts talking about that idea of survival of the fittest. Now, small sidebar, of course, Charles Darwin, he's a scientist. He's talking about evolution. He's talking about animals. Okay, so Charles Darwin's original idea of survival of the fittest says that there's going to be some animal that is more fit to survive in their environment, whatever that means. Maybe it's faster, maybe it's stronger, maybe the bird has a certain shaped beak, whatever makes a certain animal more fit to survive and thrive in society will mean that it does so, and it goes on to procreate. And animals, of course, that are unfit, that don't have the right shaped beak, will not survive. Charles Darwin's talking about animals. William Graham Sumner takes that idea and applies it to society. He says, nature is entirely neutral. She grants rewards to the fittest. Throughout this whole first paragraph, he's kind of wordy and he kind of repeats himself, but towards the bottom of the paragraph, he finally gets around to his point and says it more succinctly. He says that society has two options. We cannot go outside of this alternative: liberty, inequality, survival of the fittest, or not liberty, equality, and survival of the unfittest. He says those are our two options: survival of the fittest, survival of the unfittest. If the fittest survive, that's going to be unequal, just logically. Some people are going to be more able, more fit to survive and thrive in society, and some people are not. So what characteristics might make according to William Graham Sumner, this is not me talking, right? What characteristics might make a person more fit to survive and thrive in society? The wealthy people are supposedly, according to Summer, smarter. They're more educated. They're harder working. They're savvy. They're better able to survive and thrive in society. And people who are poor, logically, obviously, must be dumb and must be lazy. So that's the two options. That's the two sides. He says that the obvious of best of the two options is survival of the fittest. Survival of the fittest will carry society forwards. If we take from the rich and give to the poor, that's going to inhibit society. It's going to, in his words, favor all of society's worst members. We shouldn't reward dumb, lazy people. We should reward smart, hardworking, savvy people. This is William Graham Sumner, not me. All right. So that's what he's talking about, like really on the whole first page, towards the end, on the second half of the back of the page. He starts talking about what kind of relationship wealthy and poor have. I think we can agree by this point, that he likes classes. He thinks that classes are good, that wealthy and poor should exist. Does he think that the wealthy owe anything to the poor? No. It's the poor's own damn fault that they're poor, according to Sumner. If the poor didn't want to be poor, they'd go to school, they'd work harder, they'd get an education, they'd invest, they'd save up. It's the poor's own fault that they're poor. And it's the wealthy's fault, to their credit, it's not their fault, it's to their credit that they are wealthy. The wealthy have, according to Sumner, worked harder, they've invested, they're smarter, they're better capable, they're more prudent, they're just better at surviving and thriving in society. And so therefore the wealthy don't owe anything to the poor. It's the poor's own fault that they're poor. William Graham Sumner. Let's move on. Our last one. Andrew Carnegie's Gospel of Wealth. Andrew Carnegie, and it says in our little intro, was also an immigrant. So that's interesting. How might that influence how he thinks differently than William Graham Sumner? Andrew Carnegie's one of the few people who's able to make that sort of stereotypical Gilded Age rags to riches story. He starts out a young, very young immigrant in the tenements. He knows how hard it is to be poor. He knows how hard it is to be poor. He's been poor. He's lived it. He knows, similarly, that it can be done. You can have that rags to riches story. He knows that people can make it out of poverty because he did. He knows it's hard, but he knows it's possible. So right off the bat, in the very first line, he says that the problem of our age is the administration of wealth. What does that mean? If you administer something, you're passing it out, right? Like a nurse administering medicine, you're giving it out. So wealth distribution, who has wealth and what do they do with it? How do they administer their wealth? How do they give out their wealth? Who has wealth and what do they do with it? That's the issue here, says Andrew Carnegie. Towards the bottom of the first page, he agrees that there should be classes. He's a smart, hardworking guy. He's worked hard for his money. He wants to keep it. Fair. But on the back page, he says that wealthy do owe something to the poor. It's not the poor's own fault that they're poor. That's just bad luck. That's just who you were born to. He says, quote, "This then is the duty of the man of wealth, becoming the mere agent and trustee for his poorer brethren, doing for them better than they could do for themselves." Wealthy people need to be a trustee for the poor. What does that mean? They need to help the poor. They need to guide the poor. They need to teach the poor. They need to teach the poor how to become rich. They need to give to charity. Wealthy people do have an obligation to help the poor because that is your poorer brethren. This might make us think of Christianity. This is that old idea of I am my brother's keeper. Love. God said to love your neighbor as yourself. He wants to, Andrew Carnegie wants to give to charity, invest in endowments for the arts, and become civically engaged in his community to help his Christian brother. We're all brothers in Christ here. You know, wealthy and poor doesn't matter when it comes to God. What matters is what kind of life you live. If you can use your wealth well to help people, then that means you're a good Christian. So Andrew Carnegie really puts his money where his mouth is, pun very much intended. He does become an incredible philanthropist. He creates Carnegie Hall in New York City, which was originally a free concert venue. How times change, but okay. He also very famously creates an endowment that creates a string of libraries, of free public libraries across the nation. There are some in Oklahoma. Guthrie, Oklahoma has one. So the idea of that that poor people can go to the library, get a book, and become educated and learn how to save, learn how to invest, learn how to get a better job. So Andrew Carnegie agrees with William Graham Sumner up to a point. You know, he says that, yeah, classes exist, and yes, they should. Wealthy people have worked hard for their wealth, and they should get to keep it. But wealthy people do owe something to the poor. It's hard to be poor. Wealthy should be a trustee for the poor because we are all brothers in Christ. William Graham Sumner says, nah, man, no. Helping the poor is just going to inhibit all of society's worst neighbors. It's going to inhibit society. It's going to hurt society. It's going to pull society downwards. The poor, according to William Graham Sumner, are on their own. They don't deserve help. Jacob Rees kind of pointing out, poor have a lot of problems. Somebody needs to help them. Hello, Andrew Carnegie. So I hope that you can, after this document, kind of see how we're pulling out some of the important parts of these documents and also how these documents link up together. Have a fun time going through the rest of the module. Talk to you guys later.